Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our latest webinar event, Understanding and Enjoying Wine. If you've seen one of these before, you may know who I am. My name's Jamie Crow. I'm a journalist and one of the managers for Hidden and running the membership. And I'm particularly excited for this evening's event, mainly because I get to have a glass of wine, which on the other events I would not normally get to do. Before I hand you over to our two lovely wine connoisseurs, Alex and Zoe, who have joined us from the Bluebell Vineyard this evening, just a couple of notices. One, we are recording this. For anyone who didn't get a chance to watch it live, this will be available to watch back on the membership tomorrow. And of course, we will be having a Q&A at the end of the session. So Alex and Zoe will run through a virtual tour with you for the next sort of 20 to 25 minutes. We'll then do a little bit of fun wine tasting after that, and then there'll be a 15-minute Q&A session at the end. So if you do have a question that you would like to ask Alex and Zoe, you'll see that there is a Q&A box on your screen where you can just input a question from there. I can then pick it up and we'll be having a conversation between us towards the end of the event. There's also a chat section as well, so please do say hi and don't be shy and say where you're watching from this evening. I believe we've got people watching from across the country because there's never a bad time to do anything wine related. So without further ado, thank you for watching, and I'll hand over to Alex and Zoe.
Hello, good evening. Hi. Yeah, my name's Zoe.
I'm Alex, and we're from Bluebell Vineyard. Because I've lost my voice, Zoe's going to do a bit of a virtual tour with you. We have kind of lots of slides kind of showing the different winemaking processes and the seasons in the vineyard. So I will leave it to Zoe to take it from here.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll sort of briefly run you over the background of the estate. Then I'll go through the grape growing season, and then we'll have a look at the winemaking process. So to begin with, the Bluebell Vineyard is family run by the Tay family. They purchased the farm in 1982 when it was originally a pig farm. And back then, in its heyday, it had up to 10,000 pigs in its peak. They had a bit of a hobby for wine, and they thought, let's grow some wine and make a vineyard. And in 2005, they were established as a vineyard. English wine was obviously just starting to take off then. So yeah, they thought, let's put it back into an agricultural use. And it's been booming ever since. We now have over 100 acres under vine. We've got our main site within the vineyard where we first planted our vines in 2005. And that we had Chardonnay, Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. And the focus was to solely focus on sparkling wine. Then we purchased a further 2 more sites. One of them is about 10 minutes drive away, and the other one is about 2 minutes from the site. We now have 130,000 vines, and we are in the top 10 of the largest English vineyards. We have great varieties, including, like I said, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier. We've also got Bacchus, Ortega, Chasselas, Pinot Gris, Pinot Blanc, Sauvignon Blanc and Merlot. We're currently producing about 80,000 bottles of wine annually, but we aim to hopefully in the future produce about 175,000 bottles. And our head winemaker is Kevin. So if ever you come along for a tour, you may be able to meet him, you may even be doing the tour. We pride ourselves on sparkling wine. We started with sparkling wine. Majority of our production, we've got about 85% of plantings is for the sparkling wine. Our sparkling wine range, we have our Blanc de Blanc, our barrel aged Blanc de Blanc, Sauvignon Blanc, Rosé, Ruby and our classic Cuvée. And in 2019, we released our first still range, which is our Ashdown range. And within that, we've got our Valley View, Estate White, Ortega, Bacchus, Boundary Block, and Rosé. All our wines are vegan, and we are also the only vineyard in the UK producing wine from the Merlot grape. This is quite uncommon for this to happen because of our climate. The climate in the UK obviously is a lot cooler than other wine producing regions. That's why, so it's quite hard to grow this grape, but I mean, we pronounce some make some amazing wines from it. Our Ruby, which is our sparkling red Merlot, recently won last year, was it, Alex? The gold in the Wine GB. Yeah, so amazing achievement for us. I'll quickly go through the grape growing season for you. So starting off with the winter dormancy, not a lot really happens in this time. It's when the vines after harvest, they just lay dormant. They have to save all their energy for the following year. And then in January, February time, we'll start our winter pruning, and this can take a few months. So it's just cutting back all of the old shoots from last year, tying them all down and getting them ready for the bud burst. The bud burst is the second phase in the cycle, and this is happening now. This is when the soil temperatures are increasing, it's triggering hormone responses in the vines, and it's bringing the vines out of their dormancy. You'll see a lot of the green shoots here in the picture start to emerge, and this is the vines are starting to produce their green leaf before they start their fruit and flowering. Over the next few weeks, the leaves will start to grow in the picture. Bud burst is a really crucial time for us and for any English vineyard because of the frost. Obviously, with the weather today in the last few days, it's been amazing, but with the weather going in the next few days, we don't know how cold it's going to get, and if we get a frost, it is quite crucial and we don't want that. So to avoid that, we have alarms in and around the vineyards, and it will send a text to Kevin, our winemaker, and let us know if the temperature drops to below 3 degrees. Then we'll have to go out, light fires, anything to prevent the frost from setting into the vines. And what the fires will do, they'll just have the air temperature will just move around the vines, and it will then prevent the frost from settling in. The flowering stage is the next stage, so after bud burst. Here is when the vines are focusing on producing as much leaf as possible. Obviously, we need in the UK to produce quite a lot of leafage on the vines because they act as solar panels to capture all the photosynthesis and to create all of the sugars that we need for the vine to grow. And like I said, obviously with the cloudy climate that we have, we need as much leaf as possible to attract the sun. Flowering normally coincides with the Wimbledon fortnight, which is a good time to, and Alex, I think you said that there's a really nice smell in the vineyards when...
Yeah, it's very citrusy. So if you walk through a vineyard in full bloom, it will smell quite citrusy.
Yeah. So we need a good, warm, sunny weather for flowering, so we can produce lots of big bunches of grapes. If we have a wet flowering sort of 2-week period, then a lot of the bunches will be a lot smaller. So we need it to be really hot and warm and sunny that period. So the ripening and the harvest is the last sort of phase of the cycle. So over the summer, we'll start to see the ripening of the grapes. Like in the picture here, they'll start off really green, and even they'll grow quite big to be still really green. It's then only in the next phase when they actually start to change colour. You notice it more with the red varieties. Obviously with the white varieties, they'll just sort of won't go as green, and they'll go more sort of a yellowy kind of ness to them. So during this phase is when the sugars are starting to appear into the grapes. We obviously want the sugars to increase and the acidity to decrease. let's have a look. So for sparkling wine, we need the grapes to be at a potential of 10.5% alcohol. And we'll go through the vineyard and start collecting the grapes and seeing what the potential, or the sugar potential alcohol is. Also with the pips and the seeds, we need them to go from more of a green colour to more of a browny colour. And that's when we know they're sort of more and less ready to pick for harvest. Harvest can normally begins in middle of October. Obviously with the warming climate that we are starting to receive some summers, harvest can be earlier, but normally it's around beginning to mid-October and can take about three weeks. All of our grapes are hand harvested, so it's quite a long process for us, and we need a big team to work through all of our vines. So after it's been harvested, the grapes will then be sent to the winery. And for this, I'm just solely talking about the sparkling wine process. So the grapes will go into a whole bunch. So the whole of the bunch is with the stalks, like in this picture here. This is to help protect the bunches from being squeezed too hard. We don't want them to be squeezed too hard because we don't want any sort of unwanted flavours that you would get from the pips of from the grape. Our press can take about 3 tons of grapes. This is our press here, and it can normally take about 2 to 3 hours. So inside of our press, there's a deflated bag, and it's a bit like a bladder. The bladder expands and contracts over the 2 to 3 hours. Slowly, it's just going in and out. And it's pushing the grapes against the side of the press, and it's squeezing all of the juice out of the grapes. The press is then rotating, and the juices are falling underneath, like in this picture here. The juice is then taken from here and then is taken into a stainless steel tank for fermentation. Both red and white varieties are treated in the same way. We just want a colourless juice here. So the main focus for sparkling wine is that it has 2 fermentations. Especially for English sparkling wine, it's the same as the champagne method. So we have 2 fermentations taking place. Fermentation is just the conversion of sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide by yeast. So during the first fermentation, the carbon dioxide is allowed to escape the tank through an airlock. Fermentation can normally take about 3 weeks. And at the end of fermentation, we're left with our base wine, which we aim to have an alcohol percentage of 10.5%. We need it to still have quite a high acidity. It needs to be neutral in flavour, colourless, and no bubbles at all. We have about 50 different tanks at the vineyard. Some are 20,000 litres, I think, Alex, isn't it the largest one we have?
25,000 litres.
25,000 litres, and some much smaller ones. Once we have got the base wine, we will then go into a blending trial. So what are we doing here? We're just taking bits of wine from different tanks and trying to create the best wine of that vintage. We only have vintage wine, so we don't have non-vintage wine. So we are just blending from that single vintage. So in March, like now, what we're doing now is we're just blending all of those together. And then what we're going to do then is we're going to put it into bottle. And this is the bottle that is here. And the final bottle. And then the second fermentation will take place. So like I said, the champagne method is the same method that we use, where the second fermentation happens in the bottle. What we do here is we add more sugar, and this is just normal cane white sugar. And we need to calculate how much is needed, along with an extra dose of yeast. And this will go into the bottle, and it will go for second fermentation. Second fermentation obviously has no airflow, so there's nothing coming out of the bottle. So this is when the carbon dioxide is mixed into the wine, and that's when you receive, and it makes the bubbles that you get from the sparkling wine. Once the yeast dies off, obviously all the wines will be horizontal. Once the yeast dies off, you're left with a pool of yeast, dead yeast cells at the bottom of the bottle. And this is called Lee's aging. This is when you get those buttery biscuit toasty notes that you would normally get from a champagne wine. This we aim to go through about 18 months of Lee's aging. On the bottom of the bottle, you'll actually see how many months we spend on Lee's with all the bottles. I don't know if you can see that there. And so we aim to go for about 18 months with the yeast. We do trials. Once that's happened, we do trials to see if it needs longer, if it's ready to then be disgorged and be released to market. So this is now the riddling process. The riddling process is when we take off the dead yeast and like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and turn the bottles from horizontal to vertical. So once they are in bottles, they've just got a crowned cap. They haven't got a cork in at this stage. So once we have got the bottles to a vertical position, we can then, all of the yeast then goes to the neck of the bottle and it goes into this contraction, which you can see here. So they go into a bottling line, and what we are doing here is we're going to freeze the dead yeast into the crown cap, and it's minus 25 degrees Celsius for 20 minutes. The bottles are then passed through the bottling line. So at one point it pops off the dead yeast with the crown cap, and then we are adding in a dosage, which is just a sugary and base wine mixture. And this then we then add that into the wine, we then cork it, and it is then ready to just lay for about 3 months, letting it rest and letting all of the new dosage into the wine all mix in, so it's nothing is sort of lively in there. And I think that's about it, isn't it, Alex?
Very much.
Yeah.
So yeah,
these are just pictures of so there are still wines, and then back when they are just a range of our sparkling wines.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And I'm just about to pour myself a small glass of each as we speak, just to move on with that. That was fascinating. Thank you very much. And I hope for those of you watching at home as well found it so. I have to admit, I didn't realise there was so much of a process that involved yeast that went into it. It's not quite what I think about, but it was really fascinating. So my first question to you guys was going to be, as two people that have worked, for the work at the Vineyard, what are your experiences like, working there? It's obviously a very unique role, and it's a very unique establishment to be based at.
So I've worked in both the winery, the office, and the tasting room. So I've kind of dabbled in a bit of everything.
Yeah.
And it's never a dull day. Something is always different. I have to admit, the one thing I do dislike is winter pruning. I'd much rather climb inside a tank than winter prune. But it's always different. There's Kevin kind of occasionally just comes over to my little office and goes, "Here, have a glass of wine. I want you to tell me what you taste."
Yeah, the tasting blending trials and the trials at the moment are fun. We call them Wine Wednesdays.
I like that. I must admit, I do remember when we were having when we were preparing for this event. So I think it was yourself. I think we had a meeting at it was just before midday, I think, wasn't it? Earlier this week, and you had a glass of wine in hand when we were preparing this. So my next question would obviously be, just before we move on to other people's questions, it was going to be what are your favourite wines? But I think that you've actually sent me your favourite wines.
I definitely have.
So would you like to run through those? And I can have a sample.
So we're going to start with the Valley View. This is my favourite still that we produce. It is a still barrel-aged Chardonnay. This is from 2019.
Okay.
It's quite an interesting one because usually everyone kind of considers an oak Chardonnay to be quite heavy on the oak, very kind of woody tasting. This is different in the sense of I find it quite light. There's lots of stone fruit flavours for me,
Right.
but also strangely coconut on the nose.
Interesting.
That's just well, it's kind of a consensus. We even put it on the label. So that's my favourite still. And
and that is what happens.
It's just exploded.
And that is what happens when it's live. But we'll continue. Are you okay, Zoe? Bit of extra entertainment for everyone at home there. While Zoe's getting herself sorted out, I will have a taste of this. Eagle-eyed viewers will actually notice that I have actually been sipping this throughout the course of this event. And I have to say, I'll take a sip of it now, but I have noticed that I'm a complete novice when it comes to wine drinking. But even I said earlier this evening that there are a lot of delicate flavours in there, which you wouldn't normally get, and I thought that was quite fascinating. I did actually detect the coconut. I also detected a hint of vanilla in there, which I thought was quite interesting. Yeah. So I thought that was.
So it's quite. I'd say it's quite an aperitif style wine. You don't necessarily need to have it with food, which you do with, say, for example, Californian style oat chardonnays. It goes quite well with spicy food. So having it with Indian would be perfect, I'd say.
Oh, okay.
Or even Thai.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a nice, light, easy drinking, just easy drinking wine. And it is my personal favourite out of the still range.
Oh, fantastic. And then you've also obviously sent me 2 sparkling wines as well. Yes. Are you okay, Zoe? Are you back with us?
I think she's muted herself.
You are just muted on your microphone while we're talking, but yes.
I'll move on to the next one. Hopefully it doesn't explode on me like Zoe.
Oh, fingers crossed.
So the next one is another Chardonnay. It is a barrel aged, it's a Blanc de Blanc, so it's not barrel aged. This one has not seen any oak. This is from 2016.
Yeah.
So 2016 was a very warm year, which is why for me personally anyway, and for I believe Kevin, it's got quite tropical fruit flavours.
Okay.
So it's really hope this does not explode.
Fingers crossed. Right.
Yeah, we're good.
We're okay.
So it's quite young. I would say quite young, but we're now in 2021. I keep forgetting what year it is. I would say, this is really young for a sparkling wine, but it's really not.
This is this is 5 years old, and it's 2016.
Yeah. 5 years old.
What is the average lifespan of a sparkling wine?
Minimum from start to finish before you can legally sell a wine is generally about 3 years.
Wow. Okay, so that's the minimum. Wow.
Yeah.
And what can that go up to? Is there
the longest the oldest vintage we've had, I believe the wine is 2009 Magnum.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
So
wow. That's 12 years. Wow.
And then we are going to be bringing out a 2011 Classic Cuvée. Right. So that's had 100 months on lees.
Okay, fantastic.
Whereas this is very different. This has only had 19. So it's on the kind of lower end of what we do.
Fantastic. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I can definitely detect the tropical notes in there. It's quite sweet. Nice. Yeah.
It's not sweet per se. It's got a very low dosage, and so dosage is the thing that kind of how much sugar we add to make it. So whether it's brut, non-brut, extra dry, which is actually sweeter than brut, which everyone always finds really strange.
Cool.
But it's got loads of fruit in there, I think.
All right, lovely. And then finally, there was reds, and I'll try and keep this brief because I'd like to move on to other people's questions as well. But you've also sent me a red sparkling, which I think is very unique. I've never had a red sparkling before.
So the red sparkling is, as Zoe said, 100% Merlot. This is actually quite different. So the legal minimum for a sparkling wine to be on its lees is 9 months.
Okay. And
we only gave this a minimum of 9 months on lees. But for me, it kind of tastes like an alcoholic Ribena. I know that's
interesting, right?
Layman terms, but it's definitely got notes of cassis and blackcurrant. It's kind of just super fruity.
It is.
It doesn't really taste alcoholic, so it's quite dangerous.
I can definitely taste the blackcurrant. Yeah, there's notes. Yeah. It's just but it's very unique. But I mean, I have to say, I'm not the biggest fan of red wine, but that does have a very, very delicate flavour to it.
I'm not a fan of red wine either, which is kind of strange considering I work in the wine industry, but...
Cool. Zoe may or may not have left us. So you okay to answer a few questions, Alex? Just to finish up, because we have got quite a few interesting ones here. Someone's asked, you must have to light a lot of fires to protect 100 acres of grapes from the frost. That must be a huge task.
So they're generally about kind of big bags of wood every 3 or 4 rows.
Okay.
So every 3 or 4 rows in all the vineyards that we have giant piles of wood that we light on fire.
Wow. Okay.
it's not as labour intensive as some people. They have something called bougie candles, which is literally a candle between every single vine.
Yeah.
So that's extremely labour intensive. I feel quite lucky that we don't have to do that.
How difficult is the process overall? So obviously, welcome back. So are you okay? If recovered.
Fantastic. I don't know what my sound went. I couldn't hear you guys.
Fantastic. And when you were doing that lovely presentation, you obviously went through the process. But how long does that actually take? And you know, what are the main challenges that the vineyard has faced when going through that process?
What, the lighting of the fires?
Yeah, and just generally as well, any other challenges really?
It generally takes, if we get an alert at midnight, we'll be out there till 6. Just keep going. You have to kind of keep trucking along because I don't know if you remember, but in 2017 there was a really bad frost quite late.
Mm-hmm.
And that massively affected the wine industry. Some of the vineyards I know lost 90% of their buds, which means they had to rely on secondary shoots, and that makes the yield a lot lower.
Right.
By about 40%, like just reduced.
So there were some real challenges.
And it killed some vines outright. So they had to replant, and it takes 3 years for a vine to establish. So they can't get any grapes off that vine for 3 years.
Wow. Okay. So how have you recovered in the years since then?
So we were quite lucky, I believe, at Bluebell. I wasn't working at Bluebell in 2018. I was at a different vineyard in Rye. But I believe Bluebell were quite lucky, the fact that none of their vines got killed by the frost.
Right.
They were affected. They had a much reduced yield, but the actual vines themselves survived.
Okay, cool, interesting. We've got another good question here. How good is English wine these days compared to that from warmer countries? And this is very interesting, I think.
Okay.
It's great. I mean, as a whole industry, we've won so many awards and beaten Champagne at many awards. I know we've had winemaker awards and even going in blind, English wine has won a tremendous amount of awards. And I think we've obviously got the same soil type as you would see in Champagne as well. So why didn't they think of it sooner? But no, and I think we're by using the same methods, we're creating the same thing, if not better. Right. But and I think also with a lower price point as well. I know Champagne sales have dramatically decreased this last year with COVID. One, I think people aren't celebrating maybe as enough with friends and family, but also I think people are encouraged to shop locally and try new things, and there's so much out there now that I think people are just really, really wanting to try. And I think also with still wines, people are really wanting to try English still wines. I think we're making some amazing ones with the climate that we do have.
Interesting. I have to say, I've certainly found, obviously, sparkling wine seems to be a thing of the South. You know, what are sort of the pros of sparkling wine over champagne, or what are the differences? That's one thing I'm always quite curious about.
Technically, there isn't actually that much difference between sparkling wine and champagne. They're made in the same way. champagne houses like to kind of say that, you know, the kind of the A board I put up with all the bottles being riddled in before the machine. Champagne houses probably tend to use more of those than we do over here. We're a lot more mechanical in that regard to the riddling. But technically, in the processes, there isn't that much difference. Everything's kind of quite hand done, both here and over there. So
I think also as well, we've got a bit more freedom to choose which grape varieties we want to do, like our Seyval Blanc or our Ruby. We've got varieties where we don't have to stick by the main grape varieties that they're so restricted to out in Champagne. And the same with Prosecco. I know there's a few places that are making Prosecco in the UK and stuff, but I think our Seyval is most like the Prosecco, but it's made in the same way as a Champagne, but it just tastes so much like Prosecco if you want the equivalent to a Prosecco wine. And I just think it's, we've just got so much more freedom to do what we want over here. We can experiment a lot more.
That's really interesting. And that might lead on to my next question, actually. So this is a really interesting one. Somebody here said, I'm becoming a big fan of English sparkling wines, but find our supermarkets have limited stocks. Are we likely to see a change in this, particularly after Brexit? So obviously, I don't know what the rules and regulations are now.
I know that Waitrose has always been a very good stocker of English sparkling wine.
140, I think. I think we do the most in Waitrose.
I know that M&S is starting to open up as well to have English sparkling wine. I think some of the slightly cheaper supermarkets, for example, Asda, Aldi, Lidl, I think our price points trade-wise would probably be slightly too high. We wouldn't be able to have the volume. Most vineyards, apart from the really big guys, don't produce the volume to supply every single supermarket that we can.
But I guess that's part of the process, and the sparkling wine is almost becoming like the next big thing, really, isn't it? Yeah,
definitely. And I think as well with climate change, because I think you'll know more about this than I do, Alex, but it's all to do with the yields and how much we're actually producing and growing. Then sort of as time goes on, because Champagne are producing so much more than we are, obviously, and other regions. And I think we are the lowest yielding country in the world to produce wine. So that's why a lot of our prices at the moment are so much higher. But give it sort of a few years' time, I think the price, you'll see it drop because we're producing more of it and our yields are much higher.
So generally in the UK, the yield is very low. So we don't actually produce enough to compete price-wise with some of the champagnes. For example, you can get champagne in Aldi for £10. We won't be able to kind of compete with that, especially at the moment. But also, as our vines grow older and our winemakers become more experienced, we'll be able to at least kind of get that yield that we need to be that can actually compete with champagne. They also have a much denser planting. What's the term I'm looking for, Zoe? Planting density than we do over here. So we have about 1.5 meters between our vines, where they have under 1 meter. So they actually plant a lot more vines in a lot less space than we do.
Interesting. I think we've just got time for a couple more. We've had one question here. How long does it, you might have touched on this in your presentation, Zoe, but how long does it take for a vine to grow? And they've said the bean productivity from planting, that might be possibly the length of the process.
So for us to harvest grapes from the vine, it's 3 years from planting. And then they usually get a higher yield about 4 years after that. So kind of they can last up to 50 years in the ground. There are some vines in France that are well over 100 years old, and in Australia and New Zealand as well. But usually the vines get killed by kind of disease or frost before they can reach that age over here.
All right, wonderful, fantastic. Well, just finally, then, thank you so much, guys. Obviously, as I said at the beginning of this, Alex and Zoe both work for the Bluebell Vineyard, which is based in East Sussex. Where can people book for a tour? And do you just want to give us a run through of what the tour actually entails?
Okay.
Yes, so you can book via our website, and And also the tour will kind of have sort of what we've gone through today. Sort of we do the cheese and wine tasting. So you'll have sort of a mixture of 5 wines, and we're matched with a local dairy, which is just up the road from us. And then we also just have a normal tour and tasting. So it's just the tour side of aspect, and then you'll have a tasting afterwards. And then we do have some sort of local pub collaborations that we do as well, where you can have sort of the vineyard tour. You can either decide to go to the pub lunch before or after, completely up to you. But yeah, we've got a long list of sort of all the options and the packages that we have on our website.
Fantastic. And I know also that we've had a number of your tours up on our offers and vouchers pages, and they've sold out now, which is fantastic. So I really hope that our members who may be watching, who booked those tours, come along in the summer and really enjoy themselves. If you haven't booked a tour, I will say that we actually have a competition to win one of these tours on our competitions page. The deadline is actually midnight, so you haven't got long left to enter. But if you just go to our competitions page on Hidden, for full details are on there. It's very simple. It's just a simple entry telling us why you'd like to treat someone to one of these, of which I'm sure there will be plenty of interest. Guys, thank you so much for taking part once more. Just a reminder again to members that this will be available to watch back in full from tomorrow. So please do tell anyone who did miss this evening to come back and watch it. It's been really interesting. Alex and Zoe, thank you both so much for taking part, and have a lovely evening, and farewell.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.